And I've done that in Fsharp. I will admit there are bits and pieces, even in the Fsharp compiler, which I put in probably late at night, where I used mutation, and that hung around. I know I'm really Scott. I mean,
And we're live. Hi, Don.
Hi, Odie. Hi, Scott. Wonderful to be on your show.
Oh,
And lovely to have this time with you both.
yes, thank you so much. Yeah, we appreciate it. So if you don't know, this is Don Syme. He is the creator of the Fsharp language. If you've been following Tech Conception for a while, you know that we like Fsharp a lot. Myself and Scott is how we met in the Fsharp community. So it's a great honor to have the creator of the language here himself, Don Syme. So just jumping straight into it. I wanted to find. Oh wait, okay, go ahead.
Hold on. I believe there's another major contribution as well. I thought it was generics within the C# language, or am I confusing that with somebody else?
No, that's me. That's my background. Yeah, absolutely. And we can get onto some of these topics as we go through. Yeah, but that's
okay.
Yep, absolutely. That's something I've done in the past, quite a long time ago now, but it was a lot of fun back then.
Okay, awesome. So, my first question, because I'm dying to hear this question, right? To ask this question. From my experience of Fsharp, right? Fsharp is like a completely different kind of thing. Like you can't mistake Fsharp for C# or Java or, some of the existing languages. So I'm sure you had an idea at some point that, this would be a great language to have. It should have this. It should look something like this. How did you, because we get ideas all the time, right? I'm just talking from my own experience, but being able to execute on those ideas, especially when those ideas aren't really mainstream, right? So there's this thought in my mind of, if you go ahead with this thing, who is going to use it? Is it going to be, it's not like what every other person is doing. So the first question I want to ask is, what motivated you to start this project and say, okay, there needs to be some kind of OCaml-like language in .NET, and how did you keep yourself motivated doing it? Because I will tell you from personal experience, there are many projects I've started and just abandoned halfway, right? And whether or not they are good ideas, I may never know. So yeah.
Yeah, no, me too for sure, and I've had that experience as well. So you touched on part of the motivation, which was to do with having an OCaml-like language for .NET, and I mean it's you got to roll back the history to quite a long time ago, okay, to the kind of late 1990s, and I've given some talks on this recently. One is called The Early History of Fsharp, and that's a paper that we wrote for the History of Programming Languages, the Hopple conference, and that covers quite a lot of the background in the motivation. It actually captures the source material as well, the actual discussions we had in the actual mailing lists back in 2001, 2002. The purpose of that conference and those papers is to get the source material in the history of programming languages from a whole range of different people and languages and initiatives. So it's a really fascinating conference. I only run it every 5 years. And I'd really encourage you to kind of, or everybody listening, to kind of go back and read that particular paper. There's a matching talk that goes with it, which is called Narratives in the History of Fsharp, or the Early History of Fsharp, which kind of draws out what were the underlying storytelling that I was doing when I was writing this kind of paper. I won't recap all of that, except to say the world was very different back in the early 1990s. The 1990s, there'd been this kind of object-oriented tidal wave that kind of run through the industry, and it was one until this point. In many ways, academia had been leading on the programming languages side of things, and then suddenly this kind of industry initiative called object-oriented programming kind of rolls through, and there are a lot of different reactions to that. Some in many ways, it was a great thing. And as you know from a user of Fsharp, Fsharp is a combination of object and functional programming. It's bringing on both these themes and making them work together. And so some people reacted to oriented tidal wave by becoming. Some people did what we did with Fsharp, which was to try to integrate the kind of worlds and make them work together. Some people had other reactions, and I kind of go through those in the paper. Some people became much more theoretical. Some people tried to keep a very, very pure approach to functional programming, where these worlds would never combine. Some people just gave up on any of the themes of functional programming and its related and overlapping communities. But I was in the first camp, and I was, along with some other really key players in programming languages at the time, much more senior than me in some ways. People like Martin Odersky saw object-oriented programming come through, and he was from this world of programming languages and functional programming in theory, and he wanted these things to be able to work together in a practical and effective way. And that was the genesis of the Scala language. It was also the genesis of a whole set of initiatives to improve Java and to fold these ideas together and to get a synthesis between these ideas, rather than sort of letting there be two completely separate and opposed camps. So Fsharp, Scala, and a bunch of other things in the last 20 years, including C#. You can look at C#. What is C#'s reactive to the rise of functional programming? Well, they're pulling in everything they can do to make C# more functional, to kind of allow them to play in that space more and to not have to go through the kind of ridiculous design pattern kind of things that you sometimes have to do in the object-oriented world. And so you kind of, when you analyze these designs and these communities and these people, and you look at them partly in sort of more tribal kind of terms, actually, it's more like I was from the functional programming, but they were my people. That was the world I kind of grew up in my PhD, and I really wanted it to be a practical thing in industry. I wanted to be able to use Fsharp myself, absolutely. I wanted people all around the world. I had seen them doing OCaml style functional programming and see how effective and accurate and productive it was for a huge range of tasks. And I wanted that experience to be able to be accessible to many more people in industry, including your good selves.
yes.
So that has always been my motivation.
Wow.
And the fact that people have used it, learned from it, been challenged by it, and I think that has had a big effect on C# through things like async and generics. We've had a huge effect, not just on C#, but you look at TypeScript. I mean, perhaps above everything, in the sense that, I know Microsoft wouldn't have done something like TypeScript if it wasn't for the fact that some of the people on the Fsharp team went over to work on TypeScript. Oh yeah, Luke Hoban and others. The influence, I've watched the people involved in TypeScript right from the word go, and I knew their background, and it's soaked in the kind of the thinking of typed functional programming as applied to the world of JavaScript. Which is great as well. It's like the world has just come so far since the early 2000s. I mean, it's a long time ago now. You'd hope it had come that far. So I'm pretty pleased. But I'll let another question in a moment. But just to say that back in the early 2000s, people were saying programming language design was over. There was nothing more to be done. Nothing more to be done. Okay, there was no more change was going to come. They had already in the kind of Java kind of space, or maybe the C#1 kind of space. That was it. There was nothing more to be done in that kind of area. And then you see things like async and generics and strongly typed functional programming and a whole bunch of other things that have kind of rolled out in the languages, and you see them slowly rolling their way through the programming languages space. And yeah, a lot of people's software development life has been made a lot better because of what the investments that people have made in those core languages over time.
personally, so sorry, Scott, but personally, I feel like you are understating the amount of influence, because if you think about it, even the concept of async, right, has swept through the entire industry. It's not just TypeScript. It's not just other languages like Rust.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's
and I was Fsharp was one early delivery of language integrated async programming, and I can tell you that was not the destination that anybody else at the time was pushing. The motivation, the big industry thing at that particular point in time was multi-core. Everybody was saying languages have to, we're heading for a world where having 2, 10, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, whatever cores available will be totally normal in these shared memory architectures. And we're also heading to a world which was suddenly where programming was much more dominated by network-oriented I/O, so doing web requests of some kind or doing web serving. And there was also everything that's happening in the JavaScript world in terms of async, which was a huge explosion. But at Microsoft at the time, the focus, nobody else really was orienting towards this async as we know it today. Yeah. One other important project called Axum was a programming language which was sort of an async first programming language. It was actually done in Visual Basic initially. It was a modification of Visual Basic, I think called Visual Basic Orchestration. Okay. By Nicholas Gustafsson and others, but there were just those two projects were doing kind of really deep and proper thing that you'd recognize as async today. And so then we did what we did in Fsharp. The C# people understood it, digested it, did their own, in some ways an evolution of that, or in some ways a fit into C#, a kind of a lift and fit and change kind of thing into C#. And and now it's rolled out across the industry, and there occasionally you see people saying, "Oh, I don't like async." Very occasionally. The number of people who do like async, it has landed well. It has solved, it is so complexity reducing when used properly, and so it's a great feature. Very happy to have been a part of that. That history of that, for those interested in the early influences before and the influences after, trying to be fair, trying to tell a small part in the story. The async programming goes way, way back. Coroutine programming goes way back into the 70s and so on. And that's all in the early history of Fsharp paper, at least my little pivot in the history kind of point of view. Other people will have other points of view. And I encourage everyone listening to go back and take a good long read. It's a fun paper. I think people enjoy it if you're into history and the history of ideas in programming languages.
Nice.
So I have a statement / question. So I'm still kind of confused about Microsoft Research, the motivation for Fsharp. Observing it from the outside, looking in, I feel as if the Fsharp programming language was treated as a proof of concept of what could be accomplished based on a different perspective of things, and then for a mainstream language to pick away at what has been successful with it, instead of it being introduced as a first-class citizen. I understand now it's a first-class citizen, but in the United States, it's not treated as a first-class citizen, which is probably different from European countries. Are my thoughts accurate, or can you help me get a better understanding of what Microsoft's initial vision was for it?
I mean, there's elements of truth in all in those different perspectives, and there were many different players involved in both the origin of Fsharp as a research project. I mean, I've covered part of the motivation, which was from my so it was always these two things. It was one about bringing functional programming into the world of .NET and the enterprise, and that meant making something practical that people could use to do real work. Okay, and then it was also bringing sort of .NET or the world of the enterprise into the functional programming world as well, bringing those two things kind of closer together. Now, the truth is about why it is part of the Microsoft stable of programming languages is because that combination has very valuable practical application in certain kinds of enterprises, and most notably in certain major financial companies actually want to program a lot of their core analytics and their core financial modeling in F#. Okay, or we can say roughly back, if we look back in history, and this is also covered in the history paper, you can see some of the companies who were involved in basically telling Microsoft, we really want to use this thing. This is where we want to be in programming. And if you look at what the choices that were available at that time, you can absolutely see why. And if you look at the choices available now, you can absolutely see why they still say this is where we want to be placing our programming, because the work they're doing there is just phenomenally valuable in terms of making money, and they want it to be they want it to be accurate, and they want their people doing that kind of programming to have the very best tools available. And when I say the best tools, that means interoperability, that means performance, it means all the kind of things we're getting from the world of .NET. It means software engineering. And a big part of what they're doing here is where they have like research level people using this kind of tool, or very strong individual programmers, and you want to be able to deploy into production without rewriting the whole thing. And we all know that as individual programmers, you as an individual want to be very empowered to kind of get your ideas into practice, and F#'s an absolutely great language for that. But in an enterprise, that also applies. But the situation's even worse, which is if you've got people developing in, say, Julia or something like that, and it may or may not be deployable, depending on how things are working in your enterprise, and you have to rewrite to another language in order to deploy, then that reduces your time to market in for these kind of components that are being developed. So in short, there was enough of the money-making end of the industry who wanted this particular kind of language as their solution for their programming problems, in order for Microsoft to be able to say, hey, yeah, okay, we actually do want to add this F# thing, this strongly typed functional programming, functional first programming, I guess I'd say, into the set of supported languages. Now, that doesn't make it mainstream. That makes it somewhere in between academia and mainstream. It makes it, and so I often say with F# that actually some of the hardest places to adopt F# are around the edges of its adoption zone. There are some people who just are working in an enterprise where F# is part of the accepted solution. You take although its roots are in finance, there's actually some really strong use in media and cloud. Okay, so actually, the world of programming has headed more and more towards this functional first programming. Cloud programming, server-side cloud programming is very functional. There's a lot of stateless kind of stuff going on. There's a lot of requests coming in, a bunch of data transformation going on, and then getting it off into the cloud storage. The kind of state has been shifted out and put out of the local machine, and is now mediated through this sort of state that's in our cloud fabrics these days. And so if you take a company like NRK, the Norwegian state broadcaster, okay, the equivalent of like CNN or the BBC in the UK, they use F# for loads of their server-side kind of media programming kind of stuff. So they're in a situation where they can adopt very, very easily. But the hard places to adopt F# around the edges of adoption, the kind of the margin. Okay, that is, so people doing consulting actually often have a really hard time, because they they will often go into a company, as themselves, and kind of, where. So you go into a company, say, how I'd like you to use F#, and they say, no, you're consulting for us. We write the contract. We say the rules about what language are going to be used, and you're not going to use, you're going to use X, Y, Z. No choice. Okay, and so I am aware of that. There's levels of mainstreamness. From a certain perspective, it's very mainstream. It's like very adoptable, can be used in all sorts of business scenarios. Packages are available just from a lot of sort of technical criteria and quite a lot of social criteria. It's actually quite mainstream. From some other perspectives, as in top 6 languages in the world or top 10 languages in the world, it's not. And that does affect the adoptability in some situations around the margins. Absolutely.
Okay. So Scott, you wanted to say something?
No, I was raising my hand when you said consulting.
Oh,
And,
okay.
yeah, so I just sneak F# like code into the enterprise code bases, and then I just walk away after my contract is up.
Well, look, there's a saying. People say, "How do I adopt F# in the enterprise?" You know the joke, which is you go right click, add project. you just go ahead and do it. And often in testing is a great place to do it. F# makes such a
FS
nice,
unit.
sweet, succinct. FS unit is a lovely testing framework, and the actual kind of data and sort of oriented programming for doing testing it with F# is great. That and yeah, so
yeah, I will say, and I'm sure that a lot of people probably feel the same way. Is has it been like maybe 6 to 7 years, maybe? Uh, my very brief story was I was on contract in some hick town, USA, far from home, and I had a 6-month contract, and I was miserable because I live in Miami. It's an international city, a lot of things to do, but I
okay.
was in a rural area, and I'm like, how can I make the best use of my time? Because I'm going to suffer mental illness when I'm just alone with my thoughts and I'm not working, right? So, after in the evenings, I'm like, I'm just going to learn a new language, and it ended up being F sharp. But I will say, why am I saying all this? I will say that, like a lot of people say, it did make me a better programmer. It's when I step into software shops and I'm constrained to writing C# code, because of the F# paradigm that I'm borrowing from, it's a lot more focused. It's just the concept of writing business equations. It's something that seems to be very advanced to mainstream shops. And plus, as an underrepresented minority, I'll come out and say it. It really gave me an advantage in regards to being recognized and having more opportunities. So, thank you.
I am very pleased that it's played those roles in your career development, and hopefully can continue to play those roles. And I'm sure also for you to be a role model for many future programmers who want to take their skills that extra kind of level. Yeah. Good to hear.
My own story is more dramatic than that. So I have a video on it, on how I got into F#, my thoughts on the F# ecosystem and stuff like that. I'll also link that as well. But suffice to say that, F# has pretty much changed my life, because it was one of those things that became like a differentiating factor, right? So even when I put it on my resume, they're like, this guy is interesting. The fact that he's into this language and stuff like that. In fact, there was even a company I applied to where some of the people who were supposed to look at my CV, right, were already following me because of F#. So, it was exceptional. It was great. So,
good to hear, Eddie. I'm really pleased. And Scott, I was going to ask. You said something interesting there about business equations, and is this what were your guiding resource was this a sort of domain modeling made functional kind of thing?
Yes.
Got it.
Right. So making basically writing type declarations that model the business terms of whatever domain that I'm working within.
Yeah, and not
yeah.
kind of just the business object, mutable business objects, or representing change through transformation of those objects and that sort of thing, right?
Right. So what between Scott Blashen's book and me picking up Fsharp, I started doing things in reverse, right? So the object-oriented community and what we've been fed as Kool-Aid is everything is a noun, and you basically design your system noun first, right? And after learning F# and again, a lot of praise to Scott Blashen's videos, his technical blog, I started saying, okay, what are the core operations of this specific system that has yet to be written? What are the core operations? And I'll create my module that models whatever that subsystem is, and I'll say the core operations that this has to succeed at is this, this, and that. And I'll go ahead and write my type declarations, right? And then I say, and of course it won't compile because what types, what are the parameters? But it forces me to write out the names, even though the names haven't been defined yet, and say, okay, in order for this specific operation to succeed, what does this parameter have to have? And I'll just start flushing out that domain or that specific system that way. And it's just a lot more productive for me. When I have to think about nouns first, I get in the habit of not focusing on the rules, but instead focusing on all the objects that may not necessarily be relevant, but I'm constraining myself to think about nouns, and that wasn't working for me.
And okay, so by focusing in some ways on the verbs, on the operations and the transformations, it becomes much more of an information flow kind of representation. Is that how it kind of flushes out as well? It's about how this kind of information flows through the system and gets transformed as it goes.
Yes. So when I'm writing out these business equations and I'm going, this operation. In order for this operation to succeed, it requires this parameter, that parameter. Oh well, in order for this parameter to really be realized in this specific operation, it has to have the following. It starts flushing out the states. Right. So now I have qualified.
The states are made explicit through this sort of information representation. Yeah. Scott, one of the things Scott also, I just kind of getting a measure here from you about his kind of methodology and putting it into practice. One of the things he's big on as well is that the language that you develop through this kind of methodology and this process is actually useful language for communicating to clients, to customers, to the non technical people in the business discussions. Have you experienced that, or?
I have. I mean, in my last project where I was a domain architect, by default, I always go through the exercise of doing my type declarations or my business equations, right? And I'll pass that out as a compilable specification to each development team. And of course, it looks like Egyptian hieroglyphics, just like when I started learning F#, it was like, I don't understand. What are these arrows, right? But then, I mean, it literally takes like probably 15 to 20 minutes for them to understand the gist of what they're looking at. And then we'll just start iterating. They'll start challenging some of the designs of the business equations that I put out there, and it becomes literally a compilable specification that can serve as an interface for us to write the implementation details for.
And this is, when you look back through the history I was kind of talking about, back to the OCaml days, right? This idea of a compilable specification, an executable specification, was absolutely at the core of what people were experiencing as productive, the golden productive sweet spot of using OCaml. This golden, in my history talks, I refer to it as kind of a golden thread that runs through the history of, right from the early history of these ML programming languages through to F# as you're describing its use in this kind of domain modeling kind of world. So yeah, that thing that when I first used OCaml at Microsoft, very first project we did was actually to do with modeling .NET, of all things, modeling the bytecode of .NET and modeling the verification rules, the kind of that the .NET had to implement. Okay, and we wanted to have a high level specification, but we needed to test it against the actual C++ implementation. We also wanted to be able to perhaps like do some logical analysis of that high level specification of the rules, which were in a sense our business rules. Okay, the actual, but above all, we wanted to be able to run it ourselves as a kind of mini implementation of .NET. And so we modeled .NET in its types, its domain, and we modeled the rules of .NET. Like you are with your architects and your dev teams, and then it's like that idea that you can have an executable high level specification is just runs through project after project that uses F# or OCaml and other similar languages, and it, it's such a sweet spot in architectural level. Sometimes you got to go and take those components and go re-implement them in something else, because for deployment or performance kind of reasons. Though ideally not. Ideally, you can just go all the way through and iterate that down into an actual product that can be delivered. So interesting.
Yeah, one technique that I used to use as well was I wouldn't even let them know that this was F#. I would say during our like joint sessions where we are all brainstorming and stuff like that, I would just start writing types. I would say, okay, this is what this is, this is what this is. And my experience has always been that, they go along thinking that, oh, this is just some language OD formulated to describe this. Then when I now show them that, look, I can start writing code against this in FSI, and all of a sudden you can see light bulbs light up.
Yeah, and this is part of what I mean about the F# being about bringing worlds together that previously were a long way apart. In that, if you look back in the history of modeling and methodology in software, okay, because roughly speaking, you had theory over here, you had modeling and methodology all the way over here, and maybe in the middle there was something called software engineering, kind of it's a discipline in between. But the theory people over here really didn't talk even to the software engineering people, and they certainly didn't talk to the modeling people, which is all the sort of UML kind of modeling back then, and other kind of methodological kind of things. And what I'm so grateful for what Scott Relashin has brought to the F# world, and in fact, that by doing F#, it brought these techniques, these functional techniques, type functional programming techniques, closer to Scott in his point in the industry, and he took it up and ran with it, and then made this methodology which has influenced so many people. And maybe make sure we have a link for the people who are listening to Domain Modeling Made Functional and to Scott Relashin's kind of material, because I didn't know how to bridge the gap all that way. I knew how to bring it some of the way to get F# into the world of .NET, but I didn't know how to modify the language of domain modeling and deliver it through to people like you. It's really Scott who's done that hugely.
He has a video called Designing with Capabilities that is also very good.
Yeah, and that's another example. Like capabilities as a concept that you make capabilities explicit is a thing from the functional programming kind of world that gets brought across, and is some of the operating systems kind of world as well. And again, he's kind of taking that and running it. And I do hope, I haven't talked to Scott in a year or so. I do hope he can come and appear on this show with you guys.
Well,
Yeah,
I'll talk to him
absolutely.
twice on my own personal channel.
You've had him on. You've had him on yours. What's your personal
Yeah.
channel, Scott?
Oh, it's dropping subscribers like crazy, but it's called Bismonger. That's my internet handle.
Got it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but it's not really focused. It's really just it's me documenting my professional journey, right?
Great.
So there's no focused content. There's no editing. I just
Okay.
have a masterminds that I recorded earlier today, every Friday, 7:30 East Coast,
Superb.
where I'm working on a tech startup as a solo founder, and I basically wrote like an Uber Eats application or Uber Eats system in Fsharp, where the client
Yeah.
is Xamarin, and now I'm trying to get funding through Y Combinator, and I have hopefully within the next 2 weeks I'll find out if they want to interview me or not. So
Good luck.
Yeah. So speaking of Y Combinator and startups and stuff like that, one of the things that I was thinking about earlier was how do we've seen F# in the enterprise, right? We've seen F#, especially in Europe, right? F# is really strong over there. In fact, most of the jobs I got were in Europe. But the question is, how do we translate that to the startup culture in Silicon Valley and, people who want to start new businesses and so on and so forth? Having that, many languages have tried to cross that gap. I think of all the languages, a few of them are really doing well. Languages like Rust, languages like Python, obviously. But what do you think from an F# ecosystem standpoint? What do you think we as part of the ecosystem can do to drive adoption in that direction? Because if there's anyone who doesn't have like ties to the existing system, is usually startups, right? Who have the choice of picking a new language.
Historically there have been some very big startups, Jet.com being one of the biggest. I mean, they became a very, very valuable company, over $1 billion. In fact, the first unicorn created that used Azure as its cloud system, the first $1 billion company.
I didn't know that.
It was done in F# at Jet.com. Yes, it's huge. It was huge. Now, that said, the startup culture, Y Combinator and all the rest, they have their culture, and it is very, very oriented around Linux historically. Okay. And F# had this massive advantage in this kind of conservative part of the industry that was, when we look back through the history, when in the days when F# was Windows only, then always Windows focused, then F# had an advantage in an area where certain languages found it very difficult to operate in. So we look at, say, Scala or Camel or Haskell or the like. They found it hard to get adoption, and F# did get a lot of adoption, and still does in that kind of area. In the startup world, F# did kind of, apart from some of the examples like Jet.com, which I gave, F# historically struggled, partly because the Linux story for .NET struggled. Everything with the Microsoft label absolutely struggled. Anything associated with Microsoft, historically, when you look back, okay. That, I think, certainly from a technical level, there aren't any blockers these days. F# has an amazing story on Linux. .NET has an incredible story on cloud and Linux, and it's just one of the best programming frameworks around, both .NET. I mean that to apply to both .NET, C# and F# for server-side programming. F# also has this huge advantage that it has client-side story as well in terms of JavaScript, and that F# compiles the JavaScript through Fable. Certainly there's a strong story you can take there, particularly about the about using F# both client and server, and to the startup to a kind of as a basis, technical basis for doing a startup. And if you go through, we did this talk called the F# Bonanza, but it's about a year and a half ago, and the set of people talking at that, some of them are actually Silicon Valley startup kind of people.
Oh, wow.
And you can go and see the kind of things that people have been doing with F# in Silicon Valley. That said, I think there's F# didn't grow up in the world, in the kind of Apache stack kind of world or the Linux stack kind of world. It's only in the last 5 years or so that it's become normal to use F# on Linux and .NET in general. And I think, in truth, we're still playing catch up in adoption in those in anyone who's oriented, whose default is to just go and use the Linux command line to start doing implementation work.
Interesting.
That applies to C# as much as F#, I think.
True. One of the things that surprised me about the first job I got, that wasn't in Nigeria, was that most of the developers there were moving from Python. They weren't even .NET natives, which was interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, and in a sense, if you want to, I've been saying this for a while, and in some ways I should have gone and done it myself, which is that probably the number one way to contribute to bringing people into the F# community would be to write a really good F# for Python programmers guide and put it on the Microsoft on the docs at .net.microsoft.com or docs.microsoft.com, and because they're actually the people who are suffering the most. I mean,
I have a solution for that.
What to go on?
Well, immediately when you said, so you're talking about how to migrate, I'll call them Pythoners to F#. Really, again, Scott Blashen's, his name keeps coming up, right? But I remember pulling up a PowerPoint slide on the latest version of, I think they called it C# 10 or something. Or no, they called it C# Lite, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the way that he marketed it was, here's a new version of C# called C# Lite, and it's less syntax, it's more terse, it's information dense, blah blah blah. He started providing all these examples of normal C# syntax, and then he would, like, within the slide deck, animate things that you no longer need, right? That were really just not. He would distill it down.
Yeah.
And then at the end he said, this isn't, something to the effect of, this is already here and you could download it now, or something to that effect. It's called F#. And I thought it was brilliant. The reason I'm mentioning this is because I think that same strategy or marketing could be applied towards whatever are the possible pain points of Python and what F# addresses within that language.
Yeah. I mean, I think from what I understand, people trying to use the strongly typed versions of Python, because Python is doing in some ways the TypeScript kind of thing to get to make strong typing an option. It's quite painful to the amount of type annotation that's required. And really the sweet spot with F# is to be just a very light Python-like language with its white space indentation kind of syntax and just very clear declarative code, and yet without anywhere near as many type annotations as you need in the Python kind of world. So and the truth is, like, not Python's an amazing language. It's an absolutely vast user space and adoption. And I'm not saying that all Python people should be moving across to F# by absolutely no means. Python is a wonderful system and should continue to be used. But there are definitely people using Python outside its comfort zone who are writing like 100,000, 200, whatever, I don't know, very, very large code bases in Python that have long-term maintenance requirements that do need the strong typing kind of thing, and could absolutely and actually performance as well. We have to be honest that Python, that .NET is amazingly fast. Fsharp is amazingly fast, especially if the comparison point is an interpreted language primarily. And so that combination, there are talks on this. I'd really point people to the talks by Darren Platt about using Fsharp in the bioinformatics industry and just how effective it has been for the core implementation of a bioinformatics stack. And we have a Fsharp for data science workshop coming up in September. It's a conference in Berlin, and everyone, of course, invited to come along and join us in Berlin on the 27th, 28th of September. And there will be people from some universities and some startups and the like who are using Fsharp in primarily with that conference is Fsharp for data science and using it in bioinformatics and similar kind of stacks. And you can get involved and hear about how to use Fsharp in those domains.
Yeah, awesome.
Odie, I have one last question, and then I think I'm done with my questions.
Go for it.
If anybody knows me, I have this weird fetish for like automated testing. Like I'm a software developer that enjoys writing automated tests. I don't know, it's a guilty pleasure. Out of curiosity, and I don't know about the other libraries such as Quick Check, or I don't know if there's a Scala check, but if you're in a position to speak on it, why isn't FS check? Why is it not well known? How come it's not something that is a go-to like tool? I mean,
okay, so just for context for everyone, we're talking about the FS Check automated testing tool. FS Check is based on a thing called property-based testing, where you effectively state what needs to be true about your system, and it goes and it sort of throws lots of different variations on inputs at the system and checks whether that property is always holding to be true. And so it's a good question. Why hasn't that sort of broken through into mainstream consciousness as a testing technique? And in some ways it has. Again, it's this thing of what is mainstream, okay? In the sense that idea, which was first done, I think, in Haskell, okay? Absolutely, there's Scala-based versions of that. I'm pretty sure you'll find C# versions of it as well. If you look around, you can use FS Check with C# as well. And I'm pretty sure you'll find probably Python-based versions of property-based testing and quite a lot of others as well. So in some sense, compared to its origins, once upon a time that was one person's idea, it's actually adopted all over industry, and there will be people if you could suddenly get a kind of global view of everybody's code all the way around the world and get a map of the world and highlight all the places where some kind of property-based testing has been written by somebody at some time and all still runs and is being used actively today, then it has spread all over the world. That idea has spread. You're talking about it. It's spread.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm talking about it. Neither of us came up with that idea. We got that idea infected by somebody else. But it's not mainstream. It's not like you take a random person in the world, like some random guy who lives downstairs here as a developer, and I ask him, do you know about property-based testing? Yeah, probably not. Okay. So it's not, maybe you've heard of it. Maybe. So it's not mainstream. So what does it take for ideas to kind of enter the mainstream consciousness in an absolute kind of way, in the way that object-oriented programming has done? Is functional programming mainstream, or functional first programming? Probably in some sense, in the sense that everybody uses a map or a filter these days. You can't do programming without, in some sense, doing functional programming. I think be very, very rare that anybody has no exposure to functional. So it's mainstream in a certain sense. Property-based testing, what would it take for it to kind of break through? I don't know. I think there's this thing that it requires mental effort at a difficult point in the development cycle. That people make their thing, they get something to work, they get some kind of core logic thing to work. And the very first thing they want to do is try it out on one thing. Okay, they don't want to write a property. Okay, that's not what they need to do. In fact, they're probably going to hurt their head to have to try to write a property at that particular point in time. So they try it out on one thing. What's the next thing they do? Well, they try it out on two things. And then what's the next thing they do? They write a loop and they test it on this, and then they try it out on a big thing, and then a negative thing, and then an empty thing, and then they kind of flesh out their testing from that kind of point. And so at no particular point do they stop and just say, well, maybe I could have just automated that whole thing. Maybe I could have just written out what I wanted and like flush out the bugs, all of them, straight away. Okay, even though it would have been faster, there's no particular point where people actually, there's this other thing is like it's immensely rewarding to do that testing. People often compare programming and other kind of activities like in computing. It's a bit of a game, right? You make your thing, and then you kind of your enemy, your adversary, you're defeating is the set of bugs in your code. And then when you've won the game is when there are no more bugs left, and you've kind of you've won. And so people, of course, love games. They love that sense of an adversary. They love that flushing things out. Property-based testing is immensely rewarding in that way, because you write this one line and then it's like nukes your code with like zillions of test cases and flushes out all the little, it's like taking a fire hydrant to your code and just like cleaning it all out. And it is really cool. But I do think it's primarily a cognitive thing. People used to say some of the same things about functional programming. They'd say, oh, yeah, the problem with functional is that, yeah, as much as you guys have had this really positive experience of Scott's, of those kind of domain modeling made functional kind of techniques, there are other people who probably haven't done the course, they haven't read the book, they haven't been organized in their head in the right way, and they will say, that technique, I sat down to try to model what's going on in my enterprise and with those kind of things, and it I got lost. I couldn't do it. It was too hard. I just prefer to go and write some code, okay, or write some objects or something like that and start. Anyway, I think part of the answer is in the psychology of how we develop software. Where in the right space can you adopt that particular technique? And sometimes that breaks down over time, and gradually people get used to. Like you could say the same thing with TDD. Some people didn't even like doing test first kind of development. At first, people found that really hard, but it's actually simplifying when you actually apply that technique, because but it still requires some change and cognitive change. And anyway, that's my 2 cents worth on that question, Scott. I don't know if that's that. Do you reckon that's right, or what do you think?
Oh, it makes sense.
Yeah. I have my own theory as to why that is, right? One of the things that became immensely useful to me the moment I learned Fsharp was, even when I was doing my day job in C# at the time, was you get a hyper awareness of state, right? And one of the things that happens in most code bases is that developers are very careless with state. They are very careless with nulls.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're careless with having too many representable states in terms of nulls. There's kind of too many possibilities lying around in their system. And I notice when I use a non-functional language of any kind that I start becoming careless with state. It's just like everything is mutable, and then you you dig yourself into some, it's late at night and you don't want to, you got some problem you need to solve, and you just say, oh, just mutate it. Right? And I've done that in Fsharp. I will admit there are bits and pieces, even in the Fsharp compiler, which I put in probably late at night, where I used mutation, and that hung around. I know, I'm really Scott. I've been thinking of I've been thinking at the next developer conference. I actually want to run a confession booth of some kind. Where we have like people come and just privately, you Scott and Odie, we can do it together. We can be the priests. Right?
There we go.
And people will come, and behind a little curtain, they can tell us what they've done in their coding life. What are the big sins of and certainly my late night use of state to hack into the syntax tree of Fsharp was a bad thing that I hung around for 10 years after that. It just poisoned that data structure. I mean, not catastrophically badly, but I kept thinking, I got to get rid of that. That's just awful. That should not be there. That is so wrong. And so Fsharp does punish you for, in a good way, for using unnecessary and state as, I mean, so I think that's one of its really big positives, is that it makes immutable the default, but it's something very practical to use.
True, and the side effect of that was that if you ask people to write tests, or they never get to the point where the understanding of state of their system is clarified to the point where they can have automated tests, right? Because it's almost like every time they run their test, it's a mystery what could happen, and it was also why there was a lot of pushback to testing in itself, because one thing that makes testing very difficult is state.
Yeah, absolutely. The more functional your system is, or at least the more encapsulated your state is, and not just in an object-oriented sense, but in a kind of ephemeral kind of. You can have some use of ephemeral local state for performance kind of reasons, but it must not leak out, as it must be as contained as possible, then once you get into that zone, then your system becomes more and more amenable to mass automated testing, and also to property-based testing, like we were talking about.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, same with me as well. Scott, Don, it has been an honor speaking with you. I want us to run this back some other time, because there are so many things that I would like to pick your brain on. So
that's great. I mean, I'm having a blast. I'm working at GitHub now. GitHub Next is my in the research group that's part of GitHub. I get to do my Fsharp language design work, and we have a wonderful team of people doing Fsharp. The tooling, Fsharp tooling at Microsoft, and also a great community of people contributing to it. And the Fsharp community it's a really wonderful group to be involved with. I think took a bit of a hit in terms of in-person during the pandemic. And now finally we're seeing these in-person events return to the scene, which is great. And we've got something coming up called Fsharp Conf, which is an online conf. And please, everyone who's listening, get involved in that, and both to watch and to participate. And it's a really fabulous community to be part of.
Very quick question. Tomas Petricek, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He has helped me so much on StackOverflow.com. I'm not sure if he blocked me on Twitter, but I haven't heard from him in a while.
Thomas is actually, I just mentioned Fsharp Conf, and he is the force behind the next one coming up, Fsharp Conf. I think is one of the people organizing this. Okay. Thomas, as at a So yeah, he's definitely still around. I think we've had a little bit of a move, in the community to use branded accounts rather than individual accounts a little bit more. You'll notice there's a thing called Fsharp Online, and Fsharp Online is a initiative by 4 of us to make sure there's a good amplification account for Fsharp related material. So if you follow Fsharp Online, you'll just get this really good steady stream of interesting, high quality kind of material, some commentary on the Fsharp kind of world. And we decided to make Fsharp Online be a community branded account, this general thing, so that many people could get involved, and we also weren't totally reliant on one feed on Twitter. It used to be the case that either my feed or Thomas's feed or a few other people's
Weekly, right?
So yeah, Fsharp Weekly is like this. It's a community branded thing, so it does it. But the great thing about Fsharp Online is we've also got a presence on LinkedIn. You can follow us on LinkedIn. You can also follow us on Mastodon, and we actually might flush out a few more on Facebook and other socials as well. And if you want to contribute material to the Fsharp community, any kind of material like this, you just tag @Fsharp Online on your favorite social. We'll see it, we'll pick it up, and we'll amplify it across all the socials. Okay, so we, the group of us, really want to be a amplifying service for all the content that the Fsharp community is creating. So maybe in the material for this session, we can put a link to the Fsharp Online Twitter, and also on Mastodon and LinkedIn. And so I think Thomas has done a similar thing with Fsharp Conf. You know, Fsharp Conf is an amazing thing. He's organizing it this time around, or in conjunction with some other people. And that's a brand that can continue on over the next 5-10 years. Thomas himself is now a professor in Prague. So congratulations to Thomas.
Nice.
He is he's at his old university, one of the great universities of the world, Charles University in Prague. And he has 2 little kids. I don't know if we talk about such personal things on this kind of show, but there are reasons why Charles is busy. That's right. So yeah, we've all got to look after those sides of life, right?
Yeah. So everyone,
they always come first. Those sides of life.
Yeah, definitely. So everyone, the links, I'm going to go through this entire conversation and make sure I have all the links in it. Thanks, Dan.
Guys, thank you too. See you both.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye.